everyone, and Happy New Year. Welcome back to the 16mm Film Crew podcast. I'm Cindy.
I'm Jermaine, aka Mr. Bulletproof.
You went on topic with your nickname this week, and I am Dale.
I did.
And I'm Dale.
You can watch us on YouTube. You can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can support us on Anchor for bonus content. You can listen to us on iTunes, Google Music, and Spotify at 16mm Film Crew Podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at 16mm Crew Podcast and on Instagram at 16mm Crew.
Well, and I'm Cheo Hodari Coker. What's going on? I didn't know if anybody was going to introduce me, but hey, I'm Cheo. What's going on?
As you guys can see, we have an amazing guest here, Mr. Cheo Hodari. He's the showrunner from Luke Cage. Not only that, he has an amazing background in hip hop. He's basically a hip hop historian. You know, he's one of the guys up there as far as Black creatives. One of the guys who kind of our generation right now look up to and want to follow his footsteps. And some backstory on how we got him as a guest. I decided to be really cocky and, critique his work. And he decided to, reply on Twitter, which, a lot of times people say stuff to celebrities and famous people on Twitter. You don't expect a response. And I was kind of nervous about responding to him. And he sent me his number, and then I sent him mine, and we had a conversation and we talked. And, kids, sometimes it's okay to shoot your shot to people in a higher bracket than you are, and reach out to them. You never know what could come out of it, because right now he's on our podcast. So, and I want to thank you for taking out the time to talk to me and also talk to us as well.
Well, absolutely. I mean, because the thing is that like Twitter, I guess I have more fun with it than most people do, because I think sometimes people get really, and I've been there where you get really defensive but you can't defend anything in 200 characters. You know what I'm saying? So it's like after a while you have to have an actual conversation. And the thing for me was that I just sensed that, I kind of have two attitudes about it. Like essentially I'm like Candyman. If anybody mentions me like 3 times, like I'll appear, it's, good, bad, or indifferent. Like I'll show up, and then, which always surprises people. Like I've gotten the response where like, someone will respond or say something, and then I respond to it, and then they're literally like you have 20 something thousand followers, and I've got like 25, and there's like an intimidation. I'm like, well, we're just people, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I don't, it's just, the whole social media thing, maybe it's because I'm old, maybe it's because I'm almost 50. It gets weird after a while, because I think sometimes people put a little too much weight on it, or having a blue check versus not having one. I mean, ultimately, I think that if you make art, people are going to have opinions, and you have to have the strength to be criticized. If something's unfair, I think you have to, at the very least, try to, if it's hitting you a certain way, the criticism, you want to respond to it. You want to talk. You want to clear the air if you can. And sometimes the other thing I learned, sometimes you can't. Sometimes people just want combat, and then and you can't really do anything with that. And it's just, after a while, you just have to just kind of hey, I tried. You know what I'm saying? And I think really, but I think the most important thing is, this whole medium, it's an incredible tool. It allows you to connect with other filmmakers. It allows you to connect, really, I mean, not to get all corny about it, like I'm about to start selling a website or some shit, but it allows you to connect with this global community of people that are in the exact same position that you're in, to trade tips, and then to build and kind of move forward. It used to be that you had to go to conventions to do that. Like you had to go to like Comic-Con when Comic-Con was small, or you had to try to like seek out people that were doing the same thing that you're doing. But now the beauty of it is that you can not only find your own community, you can also talk to people that have experiences and can now flow those experiences back in your direction, because knowledge really will rise, will elevate all boats, so to speak.
Definitely.
Any questions, or should I start interviewing you guys?
No, we're gonna talk about Luke Cage, right? Yes.
yes. That's the starting point. I guess how it all started was, I think the topic at hand. I think something was going on Twitter, and you had said something, and I had to reply to the effect of, well, some people didn't get authentic Jamaican representation in Luke Cage, so you should be happy to get what we want. And then from there, me and you had our conversation. How do I know me and you spoke about it before, Jermaine and Cindy and our rest of our listeners. Can you explain that process? It was like working with Netflix and trying to get the representation of those issues you had with them at the time?
Well, here's the thing. And as much as I've been pillared, justifiably so, by Jamaican Twitter and the Jamaican Twitter massive about the accents in Luke Cage. I'm somebody, I grew up in Connecticut, but at the same time with my family in New York City, I was always surrounded and loved Jamaican culture, and the thing is that for me, everything that I did in Luke Cage was always influenced by culture, music, the opportunity to tell histories, to kind of, use the show as a prism through which, people could look at things differently. And when the opportunity came to, looking for a season 2 villain, Bushmaster was an interesting way to go, And the thing is, in the comics, and maybe this is, I'm not going to say this would have remedied the mistake. In the comics, they say that Bushmaster is, they don't really, they never say Jamaica. He comes from, if you read like the actual, as much of a nerd as I am, and you read the actual Marvel Universe bios, the Marvel Universe bio for Bushmaster, it says that he was from a small island in the Caribbean. They weren't very specific with it. And so, I thought that God forbid, if I got it wrong and made mistakes, that people would be as forgiving of the show as we were of Forrest Whitaker's, terrible African accent in Black Panther.
Yeah.
But the problem is this, and this was what this made me realize, is that Wakanda is fictional. So there's that little pieces of a South African accent, and there's a real language of Xhosa. All these little smatterings of things, but it's not specific. Jamaica is a history, a people, a culture, and if you get any aspect of it wrong, But that's the thing. I mean, here it is. I am saying the last thing I want to do is, I was always as a kid and Mario Van Peebles is a friend of mine, but his accent in Jaws 3 was awful. I was just like, the last thing I want to do, all I want to do is make sure that here, I don't want to do the equivalent of Mario Van Peebles' accent in Jaws 3. What do I do? The shit. No one even remembers Jaws 3, but you probably there's probably a meme a minute about how bad the accents were in Luke Cage. So what happens is and this is really the thing, with a show, is that when you present all episodes at once, and it's 13 episodes, if you make a mistake in episode 1, because you're trying to put out 12 other fires and the whole ship keeps moving, it isn't like it is with a normal broadcast show where something comes out, you get something wrong, and then by the third episode you can make the adjustment and you can fix it. It's just, you're gone. And so what happens is episode 1, in the midst of making the first episode, the response that we got, I'm not gonna single out any particular executive from the Netflix side, but the note that we got was the accent is too heavy. We don't understand what's being said. And I wanted things to be immersive, the way that it was for me growing up as a non-Jamaican listening to dancehall, where at first, you listen to a song like Roots and Culture, and at first you think they're saying word them up, and then you realize after a while they're saying murderer, like, so my whole thing was just like, okay, if you immerse people in it, eventually they'll begin to understand what's being said. And when that happens, what happens is in order to correct or to try to address a note, you end up accidentally making a hybrid. You end up going off in a branch where it's not authentic anymore. But then what happens is that once you've made that branch, because you're like, oh, well, that problem's solved, it just kind of just becomes this thing that you're not being as diligent about. And so it was a combination of that. It was a combination of like, I should have really not only had people that were native speakers of patois, just in terms of just making sure that all the dialects were specific and correct. At the same time, it also comes from the acting side. People want to work. And so when you're trying to cast, I think a lot of this has to do, and this is not to throw any of the actors under the bus either, but I think the only way that you're going to get the quality of, say, for example, Lovers Rock, or any of what you saw with that Small Axe anthology, with what Steve McQueen did.
Yeah.
You have a huge pool of actors in England that are very specifically because of their parents and grandparents, and also in some cases themselves have direct lineage to Jamaica. You have a pool of actors that they've been hearing that accent their whole life. Yeah. And so they're able to authentically touch into it. When anytime, even though you film the show in Brooklyn, you have actors who, will on their resume say, yeah, I'm doing this. But then it's like when it comes time to actually do it, they're not in the same space linguistically where they're able to do it. Or you get a Canadian hybrid, or there's all these little things kind of sneak into it, so that a native Jamaican hearing it, they're immediately going to hear what's wrong. It's going to be as egregious to them as it is for me, hearing somebody say hella and they're not from Oakland, like it's one of those things where it's just like, there were a lot of things that needed to happen that didn't happen, and that I take 100% fault in terms of, missing the forest for the trees, so to speak. Where I was so much more concerned with not getting the history of Jamaica wrong, and talking about the Maroons and Nanny, and also some of the other elements of resistance and culture, that, the accent thing, I didn't address correctly. And then by the time the show is over, by the time you have all these things, there are all these pieces that don't add up. And even though I think things got better as the show went on, all people are going to remember are what they first see. And if you get it wrong in episode 2, they're not going to wait around to episode 8 or 9 to see whether or not it evened out. They're not even going to wait till episode 11 that we actually filmed in Kingston. So all those things kind of, don't help the ultimate cause of really trying to address what happened incorrectly. And then on top of everything else, then you roll it out. And then I think what happened between us when you were reacting to something that I said in 2018, I was coming off of just promoting the show. And, that was right around the time where I really was even first beginning to kind of tweet with any regularity. And I probably was a lot more defensive than I should have been. And my 2020 self, looking back at my 2018 self, that's not the response I would have had at all. Yeah. Because over the years, when people have brought it up, what I've done is I've directly, just like you and I did, I've directly addressed them and say, hey, what's your number? Let's talk. Let me personally apologize to you. And at the same time, let's also figure out, not only what happened, but let's figure out a better way to address what happens. Guys, I'm in the, well, you guys want to get on the podcast? Those are my sons.
Well, I wanted to ask you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Cindy.
Okay. I wanted to ask you a question. I was watching your Complex interview, which was amazing. And you mentioned that within working with Netflix and working with Marvel, that you have to know like what battles that you are going to actually like die on the hill for and what to let go. And I don't know, as you were talking about the accent thing, I was wondering like, how do you know like when is time to back off, or how do you know like when to stand your ground? Like, you know, how do you gauge like what is worth fighting for? Like for them to bring up the point that, well, we can't understand it. Well, I don't know. Like for me, I'm not sure like how I would feel about that. If I was in the meeting, I would be like, well, the point is to provide the environment and drop people inside of it, and they'll understand the world as they continue to watch. But I'm just wondering, like from your perspective, like when do you know like press?
Well, that's the thing. It's three different battles. Okay, battle number one for me was, you know, knowing that in episode 11 we actually, you know, had the goal of filming in Kingston, which we did. The importance of that and why fighting the battle to actually film in Kingston and not film in Puerto Rico and try to make it Kingston, which is what they probably would have wanted to have done. On both the Marvel and the Netflix side, but insisting on that. And then at the same time, it's like, as you're still filming, you know, really what I should have done is I should have leaned, and this is all in retrospect, and this is the thing, it's always easier after something happens, but like I should have fought harder casting wise, particularly in terms of supporting cast, to either cast directly from Jamaica or to probably do like for example what happened with, if you watch a movie like Yardy or a few others, where they were casting you know, out of the British Jamaican talent pool, or you know, but the thing that happens when you have a limited budget is that when it comes to visas, when it comes to the different logistics of putting, you know, of not just paying the actors, but providing for accommodations, all these other things. What I find now is that you have to be forceful in that and fighting for those things. And this was really only my second turn as a showrunner, having just pulled off season one. And the thing about, you know, without having Marvel snipers come out of the woodwork to for violating trade secrets, what I can't, I've been being out of, besides everyone that could really kill me is already been fired. So whatever. But you know, we never really had the kind of budgets for that show that, say, for example, that you see now with Lovecraft Country, or that you see now with a lot of other shows where this, I mean, I'm watching Lovecraft, I'm looking at CGI, and I'm like, yo, they must have had at least 3 times the amount of money that we had. And it's a beautiful thing to see. And it's a beautiful thing to see Black people in charge like that and having and empowered like that. And so in some ways, I say that a show like ours crawled so that Lovecraft could soar. And it's also the audience. Nowadays, you know, the audience is not going to go for, you know, mediocre television level effects. They want, because everything's streamed, they want feature film level everything. And so Game of Thrones and a lot of other shows have now raised that bar. And so what's great is that because the Luke Cages of the world and Black Lightnings and other shows with their audiences have expanded the amount of people in terms of proof that we watch shows and we support shows. Shows now have these bigger budgets where not only in terms of every aspect of it, you know, you're able to do that. And then also, I mean, if you look post 2020 in terms of representation across the board, it's beginning to improve. It's not where it needs to be, but it's improving. But then at the same time, the most important element is that every single specific group that is represented is now studios, and everybody knows that if there's going to be representation, it has to be authentic from top to bottom. And it's happening in ways that in some ways it's like, I wouldn't say shocking, but it's really it's interesting. So perfect example. I mean, I've got a lot of problems with the TV show The Stand, because I'm a huge fan of the book, and you know, I shouldn't say a lot of problems. I wish that they'd adapted it differently. But at the same time, it's just like, I mean, everyone's got their own interpretation. Trust me, I know something about what that kind of criticism is. But one of the criticisms of the show is the fact that the actor who plays Nick, who is in the book, doesn't, can't hear and also can't speak, is the fact that they didn't cast an actor who's in real life hearing impaired. That is a level of specificity of representation across, that is happening. And so, for example, if you were going to do anything nowadays, and this is a good thing, you would have to immediately, from the studio perspective, they would make absolutely sure the things that you would have to try to ask for, fight for, in terms of Jamaican representation, in terms of all that stuff. Nowadays, because of the fact of avoiding the backlash, of really avoiding of making the kinds of mistakes that that I made on the show. And I say I because ultimately the thing about being a showrunner is that the buck stops with you. And, that's part of the risk is, it's kind of like being a quarterback. It's like when things are going well, you get too much of the credit. When things are going badly, you get, too much of the blame. But ultimately, it's your team. And so, I'll take the fault for that in hoping that if given another opportunity and doing things differently, I would be able to, to do it right.
Yeah, that representation topic is, I think, a recurring one for us personally on the podcast, because every time we review, we can see, whether it's not even just being Black women, it's like we can see those different societal issues, whether there's transsexual, LGBT, those kind of things. When actors are in those roles, you can kind of see it's not as authentic as it would be if it weren't that way. And I think that's also, what inspired us with this podcast is because if you look at the podcast environment for most, talking about films and stuff, it's predominantly white male dominated. And there are very little voices, especially we're millennials. There's very few Black millennial podcasts speaking on film from not just as fans, but also people who are entering and trying to enter the industry. And we were hoping with our podcast to fill that gap. So for us, representation is very important.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, I mean, and it is important because that's the thing is that for so many years, there weren't. It was funny. I was watching the Spike Lee documentary about the making of the Michael Jackson album Bad, and it was talking about it. It was the early part of the documentary where Martin Scorsese was directing Michael Jackson in the video, and Richard Price was the one who wrote the script, so to speak, for the short film that became Bad. And it was interesting because it was I love Clockers, I love Richard Price's work in The Wire as well as his novels, but he was even saying how am I now the representative of the Black experience essentially. And even before, and there was another Spike Lee documentary that he made about the making of Off the Wall, where Joel Schumacher at one point was the quote unquote Black voice of Hollywood because he wrote Car Wash and The Wiz and a few other things. My uncle Richard Wesley, he wrote Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again, and he was one of the few African American working Black screenwriters in Hollywood for a long time. So nowadays you're seeing new voices, you're seeing new faces, and I think finally it's being addressed and things are getting better, but they aren't where they need to be. And I think it's just the only thing that can really happen is just to continue to push forward, and it's really important, honestly, because, representation, it's always a balance. I mean, I think that, yes, representation is extremely important. But then again, it's like you get these happy accidents sometimes, because sometimes somebody won't be from the culture and then they make something that's really cool. And so you can't always completely cut yourself off from saying, don't try to do this, because art ultimately is art. But I think really the thing to say is that, okay, people have experimented enough with the Black experience so that we now have to be the ones to try to get it right ourselves.
Right.
You know, and until you let us, you know, come in and out of Black culture the way that white people constantly come in and out doing our things is really, it's not just having, you know, it's not about saying, oh, if you're white, you can't make a hip hop movie. It's saying, okay, well, that's great. Like, if you can make a hip hop movie, can I write and direct a Harry James novel? Like, are you going to give me the same benefit of the doubt? Because if you are, then there's no argument, you know?
Yeah. Yes, I completely agree with that. I'm like
150% agree with that.
Yeah, that's totally true.
I have a question. You spoke about, but once again in the Complex interview, you spoke about living in Connecticut and going back and forth between your mom and your dad, and the experience and the differential in those environments. And in speaking about the Black experience, you kind of only see one side of the other, and it's viewed as a monolith where it's just one size fits all. How has that experience as a child influenced your work going forward to tell our stories?
Well, it's interesting. You see, for me, it's you learn, like what I call the two Connecticut's, you know, the Storrs, Connecticut that I grew up in, which is which is the University of Connecticut, you know, and like having to literally drive 25, 30 miles to Hartford to get your hair cut, you know, always being the only Black kid in class, you know, being very fluent. And, you know, I think really my experience was more like the that Dave Chappelle skit where you know, the one with Dave Chappelle and John Mayer, and about like how different races react to different music, different instruments. And at the very end, one of them, I think John Mayer was playing "Every Rose Has Its Thorn," and the brother was like, "Sorry, man, I'm from the suburbs," and he started dancing to the song, like that was kind of my experience, where I was growing up listening to like Poison and Motley Crue and you know, Whitesnake and all those 80s bad, you know, Sunset Strip hair bands, as much as I was also listening to Eric B. and Rakim and Ultramagnetic and, you know, a lot of pioneering hip hop groups, you know, coming in New York in the 80s. And then at the same time, also, you know, really my life was, I was very much like the Black kid in Stranger Things. I was going over to my friend's house playing D&D. I had no idea that this schizophrenia, this cultural schizophrenia was going to be the perfect, you know, training to be a television writer, because it allows me to sub in and out of all these different voices. It allows me to basically to be able to write from the perspective of all these different people without personally having to take that perspective, but in a way to kind of capture those voices differently, you know, is kind of what that background allows you to do. And it's interesting because really in my head, when I write, I just hear all these different people talking, and then I essentially write down what they say. And I have various techniques that I use sometimes to get the characters talking. And sometimes what I do is like, it's in my head. It's like, I'll get two characters sitting at a diner, and I just act like I'm in the next booth and they're having a conversation. I just write down what they say. Or, you know, and I know that makes me sound like I'm Sybil or some shit. Like I got all these different voices in my head, but what's interesting is that when you're able to kind of train it and tap into that, you'll have characters saying things that you realize are not necessarily you. And then you just write it down, and it's just like, okay, like I remember the first time I wrote the Cottonmouth speech in Luke Cage, where he's like, you know, when he says, "I just stalked you like a little bitch," I normally, you know, I wouldn't, you know, use a close fist on a woman. I'm like, where the fuck is this coming from? And I just started just write. Yeah, I was just like, I just heard the voice, and I just started. I went into, and you're able to do that. You just kind of just like capture something, and then you just write it. And then if you're lucky enough to work with an actor like Mahershala Ali, you know, it just becomes this real thing. It becomes like this extension, and it's like, damn, okay. And that's really kind of the beauty of the job, is that you're able to, when you can work with actors that, they end up pulling things out of you and out of your fellow writers. And the combination of which, I mean, and that's why it was such a joy to watch, Mike Coulter and Simone Missick and Alfre Woodard and Rosario Dawson and Theo Rossi and all of our actors Mustafa Shakir, like everybody just do like incredible things. The late Reggie Cathy, like so many different voices.
You, like, what was that like? What was working with Mahershala Ali? Like, and Alfred Woodard. I mean, these are like the champions of like not even Black cinema, just amazing performers and artists. Like, what was like directing, watching, giving them words to say every day? Like, what was that like?
Well, it's funny, like, how they had, I think New York Times published a list where they said like the best, the 30 or 50 best working actors or whatever. And I realized that with in episode 2 of Luke Cage, the scene on the roof, because Rob Morgan was also in the scene with Mahershala. I'm like, damn, I got like 2 of the top 25 in one scene. That scene itself, I think, is one of the best things I've ever written. And it was wild watching it being shot, because it felt like, it didn't feel like I wrote it. I was just watching it happen. And it was rain. Like, you can't really tell, but it was actually raining when we shot that. And so we were fighting the rain. It was a night shoot. And Mahershala, he internalizes everything. And so he kept saying, my name's not Cottonmouth. My name's not Cottonmouth. Just real quiet. And I remember, like, you have to, when you're on set, the director is the director. And even if you are the person as a showrunner that is kind of in charge and the actors are always going to look to you, you have to be very careful to not undercut your director. Because then if you do, then all the chaos ensues, because then no one will actually listen to the person who's actually in charge of the set. And so I kept going to Paul, like saying, like, I need more from him. I need for him to be bigger. And Paul is a genius. And Paul was just basically just saying, I know what he's doing. We're gonna lay back, and then when he finds a space, and then that was the take. My name's not Cottonmouth. And you're like, whoa, and that's the thing. Every actor is different, and so a lot of what it is you have to, listen to what they're reacting to. To me, table reads are incredibly important. Like, anytime that you can get the actors reading the script aloud and taking their notes before you actually film it, that's valuable time. And what I always do in table reads is I never look at them actually, like, we would do these table reads, and I would constantly just be looking at the script. And what I'm doing is I'm just listening to how they're reacting to certain lines. Okay, is this too long? Should this be shorter? Did they change it in terms of how they delivered it? And if I like the change, I make the alteration so that when the script comes out, I made their change. And so, like, by the time they memorize it, it really does feel as if it's coming from an internal place. It's all those changes that you make. And, the thing about Mahershala in particular is that he always had a lot of questions about Cottonmouth's background. And so with an actor, you can never say, I don't know. So you just have to just make some shit up. So, he was constantly like, I can't do Mahershala's, get that beautiful mellifluous voice.
So
He'd be like, hey brother, like, why is he in the music so much? And I'm like, well, as I said, because he always wanted to be a musician as a kid, but he came from a family of gangsters. I'm like, well, that I made that up on the spot, but that's the thing. He kept asking the questions, and then I kept having to basically come up with some things, and then we go back to the writer's room, and then we would try to make it real. And so that's why, episode 7, where I guess I'm going to spoil the show, which is Akela Cooper's episode, where Cottonmouth dies. To this day, I think I'm kind of shocked that people were so angry about the decision to kill Cottonmouth. because of the fact, there was a couple of things. For one, Mahershala, when he agreed to do the show, he had just come off of House of Cards. And the last thing he wanted to do was be tied to another show where, as a supporting role, he would have a limited ability to do other movies. Because what he was doing Luke Cage, Hidden Figures, and Moonlight all simultaneously.
Wow.
And which is why that's why he has the same haircut in all three movies. It's because he would go from set to set, and each character had a different playlist, and he would play a different playlist for each character.
That's amazing.
And that was what he was doing. And so the thing was that his character was always going to die. There was also the thing with, okay, like, even this is the kind of thing to talk about in the writer's room. It's like Luke Cage, if Luke Cage ever punched him, he doesn't have any powers, he'd kill him. So how much longer can you kind of keep that intrigue of that cat and mouse going? And so we got to that episode, and I remember Jeff Loeb was like, "Are you sure you want to kill him off?" I'm like, I said I promised him. I promised him that this was a limited run. And so and then Alfre was in tears. She's like, "Yo, you sure?" And I'm like, we gotta stay the course, you know? And then we did. And that was what was so interesting, was that people were that one episode endeared him so much to the audience. I mean, his character, that after that, you know, people were pissed. I mean, viewership goes off. I mean, I know the conventional wisdom is, you know, the first 6 episodes of Luke Cage are fire, and then shit after that is what people say. I don't agree, but a lot of people, it's because we were incredibly effective collectively in our jobs. And Akela wrote such an amazing script, and everything happened that once it happened, that no one forgave us for it. And then, as Jeff later said, Mahershala couldn't have followed Mahershala. Like, you know, because the thing was it took us a while to kind of figure out, again, you know, when I talk about everything happening at once, it took us a while to even get the Diamondback voice really right, or really get his character right. And that didn't really happen until episode 10, honestly, 10 or 11, you know, but by that point, people were still angry. And, you know, that's kind of the things about these shows, is that if you can make people care at all, to a certain extent, even when you're getting dissed, you still you have still accomplished something, because you know, you're getting them to care. And although I never wanted to have a show that people hate watched, at the same time, like, would I change anything? No, because I really think that, you know, all the performances that led up to that moment were just so incredible. And I still really value all 26 episodes of the show. You know, it was something that I still look back to, that I learned a lot from, you know, for moments of triumph and for some of our failures.
Wow, that answered a couple questions for me. I hate to admit it, but I was probably one of those people who kind of fell off after Cottonmouth died. I was lucky to actually go back and watch it again, because it really is a good show. Like, I couldn't find many faults in it the second I watched it, and I actually finished the second season. But the one thing that really stood out to me was your choice in music.
Mm-hmm.
I came for the black superhero, but I stayed for the music. Like, when I saw Raphael Sadiq, and I believe it was one of the first 3 episodes. It's like, man. So
what you know, the thing was that I was lucky enough to have Adrian Young and Ali Shade Muhammad as my partners from the very beginning musically. At the same time, also, I mean, you know, Gabe Hilfer and Susan Kent as music supervisors were able to get all these incredible records cleared. I'm very hands-on, so there are only 2 songs in the entire show I didn't pick. The Charles Bradley song, you know, Charles Bradley is the singer in episode 3, you know, who's kind of like the poor man's James Brown. No, I'm sorry. He was episode 3. In the nightclub. I can't remember the name. I think the name of the song is "Ain't It a Sin." That was one of the only songs I didn't pick, but Tom Lieber, who was a Marvel exec and had a great taste in music, picked that one. But yeah, like all this, like every single song, like I was trying to be involved with in some way, and we were just lucky enough to have some really great. What was that blood curdling scream in the middle of the podcast? I think that was my son. I think that was Jomo. Well, you've been immortalized, and you will soon be on YouTube. All right. But that's the thing is that you just try to. I really just wanted things to kind of move in a certain way. So one of the things, like one of the biggest influences on the show, for me actually is Beyonce. You know, like because what I realized at the time that I was writing, you know, not even writing, when I was first just trying to conceive the pilot and second episode of the show, it was right around the time that not Lemonade, but the record that came before Lemonade, the Black self-titled album.
Oh, the visual album,
yeah. When she dropped that,
yeah,
I always call that Black America's first binge, because what happened was when she dropped all the music videos and the records at the same time, everything collectively just stopped. You know you're on YouTube right now, right? All right. There's a water machine downstairs. You want to stay? Fine. Come on in. Wait. Are you gonna drop your Instagram tag or something so you can get some views up or something? No. But when that first record dropped, everybody just collectively just held their breath. They were like, "Holy shit!" Mm-hmm. And so my thing was like, okay, how do I tap into that? How can I, because I'm already picking song titles as episode titles, and I'm using the same artist, how do I make the entire show basically an album? Like, you know, and how do I combine the visual panache of what Beyonce did with that, with the experience of what I used to experience as a Prince fan? Because as a Prince fan, anytime a Prince record dropped, everybody would go home, turn off all the lights, light some candles, and like play the record twice, and then get on the phone and call people. You know, like this was before social media existed, before you could like tweet, you know, what you were feeling. That was, you know, because that was my experience with you know, Around the World in the Day. That was my experience with Sign of the Times, all those Prince records, all those conceptual records that would just stop your moment and that you would just listen to at least twice before talking to anybody about. And so that was the thing with Luke Cage. Was like, okay, how do we kind of get this brawny show that at the same time we're going to tap into this musical moment where you can bring all of, you know, the hip hop collective into it, but then mirror it to the visuals where they're getting the experience of everything dropping at once. And that was why bringing all three elements together, we were ultimately able to be still the only show that on Netflix that crashed the service, you know, temporarily, you know, because you had everybody from around the world, you know, talking about all these moments in the music. And then I'm also convinced that some people just put the show on in the background without even watching it, just to listen to it, you know. And that was the thing, and that was the other thing also with what Adrian and Ali did, was we were, you know, again, going back to your question about what to fight for and how to fight for it. We fought really hard to have an orchestra for the score. And we had to fight for that 14-piece orchestra. And I'm lucky that we did that, because in doing that, what Adrian Ali did was essentially they basically wrote an entire album's worth of music for every single episode. So when you go through the score of both seasons, it was amazing what they were able to do. And a lot of TV shows that you see, if you watch like your average CBS procedural, you know, they're scored, but it's usually like one composer, like with a keyboard that's just making a lot of synthesized sounds, as opposed to what it sounds like to actually have like an actual orchestra, you know, do everything. And then it just gave a whole feel to the show. And then it was interesting because season 1 was just a lot of pulling in favors, because with Marvel Secrecy, you couldn't tell people that you were doing Luke Cage. Our code name at the time was Tiara. So you saying like, hey, will you appear on the Marvel show Tiara? And they're like, hell no, I ain't doing that shit. So we weren't able to get a lot of people. So I basically had to open my Rolodex. And so Ali, Shaheed Muhammad, and Rafael Sadiq share a studio in North Hollywood. And so we were literally just able to say, Raf, do you have anything that we could use? And so that's when he did the song Angel, and we also love Good Man, and he gave us a good deal on that and did that. Faith, because of my having known the late Notorious B.I.G., that was another personal favor I was able to call in. And so by getting them for the first 2 shows and them having such a great time doing the show, word of mouth spread that, hey, this is a good show to appear on. And we were able to get other people to appear, and really had some great performances. One of which my favorite was the late Sharon Jones in the finale, her performance of 100 Days, 100 Nights. And, it was really poignant that both her and Charles Bradley appeared on the show, and they're both gone now. And so you have the opportunity sometimes with these shows to immortalize people. And so I was really proud of the fact that we were able to do that. But then a lot of it is also just calling in favors. Like D Nice is I've known D Nice for 25 years and is an old friend. And so it was crazy because like having him on the show and having him have, the whole thing, his laptop with the D Nice on it. This was before club quarantine or any of that stuff. So it was, he always, like, every time I pop in on Instagram, and I say it, he always shouts me out because he said that being on the show helped him build his brand. So, it's all who you know. And that was also the thing. I mean, knowing Method Man. I've known Method Man for years. And so getting him specifically to make that cameo and write that song, that's how it all builds. And we did it in a way that I think people had a lot of fun with. And second season too, second season performances were incredible. And so many of them stand out. KRS-One, Rakim, Gary Clark Jr. I mean, we had some really Stephen Marley. I mean, we had some really great appearances as well. So I'm appreciative of all of it, honestly.
Since we're on the topic of music, and you're talking about all your connections, all these wonderful artists, Sharon Jones, Charles Bradley, Method Man, everybody kind of knows the Notorious Wu-Tang story with you interviewing them and whatnot. But how is that transition for you? Because you first started out as a music journalist, being in college, interviewing people, getting records sent to you to review. How was the transition from that to Hollywood, being a showrunner and a screenwriter for you? How was that navigating that whole space for you?
Well, it's helpful, honestly. The thing was that I've been covering hip hop long enough that when I was writing about it, it wasn't like it was really as popular as it is now. And so I'm old in the sense that, like, when I first interviewed Snoop, he only up until that point made one record. I've known Busta Rhymes since he was still in Leaders of the New School. Like, when I first met Shaheed Muhammad, A Tribe Called Quest was still together. So of course I know him and Q-Tip and the late Fife and Jerobi, and the thing was Ali and I really bonded over the song Suck a Nigga, because he gave me a ride to the PATH train, and the record Midnight Marauders wasn't out yet, and he played me that song, and I was just like, it just was this otherworldly experience. And it was one of the things we talked about. So really what it is when you get, like, musicians in their own way, in their own world, they're stars. And when you get to know them in the studio, when you're around them, you get to not be nervous around, these hip hop celebrities. And so I was able to kind of translate that with actors. As actors, it's one thing to write dialogue. It's something else when you're, when you're with like Regina King, or you're with Mahershala Ali, or you're with all these actors that are now like have Oscars, and like it's intimidating sometimes. And so so sometimes you just have to just be like, yo, you just gotta chill, and you just gotta just focus on the craft and listening, and you get past that nervousness. And so the way journalism is helpful to me is that when I get in those situations where, when Alfre or Mahershala or Regina is asking me a question about a scene or about something like that, I just start leaning back. I in my head, I'm like, okay, imagine if you're writing a profile, like interview them, talk, keep conversation going. And in my head, I'm just writing an article, even though it's weird because I'm actually technically in charge of it, but I can't let them know I'm nervous. I can't let them know, oh shit, like I'm starstruck. Like you just have to just basically just use those journalism techniques to kind of get yourself through it. But then at the same time, also use your journalist eye for description, for detail, and tap into experiences to be able to explain what it is you're looking for when they have questions. And then it's in a way, it kind of became a natural extension of the experience, because it just makes me understand the creative and, understand what it is to put everything together. Mm-hmm. Like, I didn't really understand really what Puffy does until I became a showrunner. Like, but then once you become a showrunner, then you're like, oh, that's why he's a part of all these different pieces. Although no, I'm not going to be behind Mike Coulter doing anything like, I'm not a hype man, but although the dab was his ad lib, that wasn't in the script, but so I'll throw Mike under the bus for the dab. So, but the thing was, I mean, that's the thing, that's the job is, you really have to center everything that you're doing around the people that you're doing it with. And communication is the most important thing. And that was really, even especially with Luke Cage, the friendship and collaboration with Mike Coulter was really incredibly important for both of us, and still is, because as number one on the call sheet, Mike always took the responsibility very seriously, and was always approachable, and at the same time, just cared, and everybody cared. Simone cared, and Theo cared, and everybody, like all the actors. I mean, that was really the best part of working on Luke Cage, was how well the actors got along, to the point when we would all see each other, like whether it was Comic-Con or when it was time to do press or anything else. What happens with a lot of productions is that after the show is over, you scatter to the wind. And then if you run into each other, you're cordial. But every time we see each other, like they're almost tears. We're happy to see each other. Mm. Like it's so much fun. Like anytime that we get to talk about anything. But it's like that also with my fellow writers in terms of the writers' room. Like we're all still connected to each other. Like, so it's one of those things where it's like the show ending wasn't, we weren't pissed about the show. We were pissed that we didn't get to hang out and get paid for it.
Mm-hmm. So I like that you said that. Well, what I love about your story in particular is that everything that you did in your past helped you to get where you are now. And I feel like sometimes, especially in this era, people are just like, okay, I just want to do this. But actually, the journey is what gets you to like the place that you need to be. And even though it's kind of scary, it's like you get to a point where it's like, I know my craft, I know what I'm doing, and I'm confident in that. And so I can walk into these rooms and walk up to these actors. And even if I'm nervous, I can still like do my job well, because I have a story that needs to be told, and that I'm the only person who knows how to tell that story. And I don't know, that's just really like, I was just listening to your interview and just listening to you talk now, and I'm just like, wow, it's so inspiring to like hear that it's okay to take your time and get to where you need to be. Like everything's gonna help you to that next place.
Well, because that's the thing. It's like you might not even really know what it is, why it is you had an experience, or why you needed it until you were in that moment, and then now you know what to say or how to do it. So, like all experience is valuable. I mean, I think what it is no matter where you are, you have to be specific about what it is you want to do in order to get that first step. And even if you're an entry level person, on a production, the goal is just to get a job on a production. I don't care what it is, because you can learn something valuable from doing that job. So, for example, it's like when you start studying the biographies of the people that you admire, you can learn from their experiences how you can apply that to yourself. Perfect example is someone like Ava DuVernay. She was a publicist, but being a set publicist allowed her to be on set. And in the case of the movie Collateral, she got to watch Michael Mann interact with Tom Cruise, interact with Jamie Foxx, and being on set for all those moments, and she being around to ask questions. Yes, she was doing her job as a publicist, but she was also able to really kind of absorb game. Somebody like Frank Darabont, who of course, wrote and directed Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile and a bunch of other legendary movies. I think his start was, before he was a writer, he was a set decorator. Yeah. But being a set decorator, yes, he's moving plants and moving stuff on set. But again, he got to be on stage, watch actors, and learn cadences and learn, all the different things. Not only about that, but also because when you're doing set decoration, you have to talk to the cinematographer about colors. You have to learn about lighting. You have to learn all these different things. And so he was able to retrofit that into his knowledge. For me, I'm basically a glorified A&R exec. My whole goal of becoming a writer and everything was really to be an A&R exec. I never got there, but putting together Luke Cage was kind of like putting together a record, and so it's like all those aspirations, I just use that energy differently, in this. And so it doesn't really matter where you start. It's just that you have to have a goal in mind, and you can learn something along every part of the journey to get to a place where you finish.
I think that's the issue. I think with our, like you spoke earlier before we started recording about the whole, during the recording, about the social media generation, kind of where it almost feels like we're used to having instant gratification. We're not used to working for it. And it's kind of like your experience. You're talking about listening to Prince albums, like when albums or whatever, we're binge watching now. Everybody, it's a communal thing. Like as soon as it comes out, we have to instantly talk about it. We want it now. And we we don't want to take the time anymore to develop and grow our talents. Like I was talking to a kid once at my church, and he was like, "Oh, Dale, what do you do?" I was like, "Oh, I work for a production company," stuff like that. He was like, "Oh, I want to do that, but I don't have any equipment." And I was like, "Do you have a camera? Do you have a phone?" He was like, "Yeah." I was like, "Start with that." He was like, "Nah, man, I need to have an actual camera, man." And I was like, you have to learn the basics with the little bit you have before you get the opportunity to move forward with something more intense, like with a DSLR or a Red camera. So,
yeah.
Well, I mean, that's really, I think, the most incredible thing about, I don't want to say your generation, because if I say your generation, then I realize how old I am. I mean, but the thing is that I'm old enough to remember when you had to have a music player, a video camera, and a phone, and a scanner were all separate pieces of technology. You didn't have them all in your pocket. And now, like particularly when you start talking about something like the iPhone 12, it's literally, I mean, you can shoot like studio quality high definition, like in your pocket. You in your pocket have more than Spike Lee had when he shot She's Gotta Have It. And that's the thing, you would need, like, She's Gotta Have It nowadays, he probably could make that movie now for $5,000.
Yeah.
And so you have to kind of remember that. And you have to look at She's Gotta Have It. You have to look at A Clockwork Orange. Because A Clockwork Orange, I think, was shot in 16, you know? And so if you basically took She's Gotta Have It, El Mariachi, and Alien, which also has a lot of in-camera effects, and you can take pieces of all these movies and on an iPhone, like just what you can learn about camera angles and I think there's really that. And I remember I had a tweet about TikTok that kind of went off where I said that like TikTok is completely, it's basically you have your average kid on TikTok has this, or they're doing like these advanced jump cuts.
Yeah.
That like people have to go to film school to learn shit like that.
Yeah.
And that's now just a part of the visual TikTok language. You know, like so you've got people that are basically messing with editing and time structure in this silly way, but without realizing that they're making themselves filmmakers. Like, I mean, it's just really just about how it applies. You know, with my wife is asking me if I'm still in the interview, so I said yes.
Yeah, I watch those TikTok videos and I see the edits and I'm like, how do you pull that off? Like, I look the amount of time it would take me to sit and pull those edits off at an editing bay, and they do it just like that with their phone. I'm always impressed when I watch those.
Yeah, no, I mean, but that's the thing. I think part of it is helping people realize that the technology is never going to get better in terms of when you start out. So you might as well, I mean, you paraphrase James Brown like I always do, you got to use what you got to get just what you want. Hot pants. I mean, but that's what he's saying. It's like, you got to basically take whatever tools you have. I mean, but that's the thing. It's like you always think that things are going to get bigger and better when you become a professional, and they do. But you'll find yourself going back to the same techniques that you used before you made it. So, like right now, strangely enough, I mean, now that I finally have to set up with I've got these 2 gargantuan screens. I've got the computer I've always wanted, but I spend most of my time now when I write on legal pads. So it always goes full circle, because the thing is that with so many screens you can get distracted. So I find the best place to do my first drafts is writing by hand, and then typing what I write, and then it becomes a second draft. And then the other thing that's great about writing by hand is that you can write anywhere. The only limitation though is you better not lose your notebook, because that's it. there is no cloud for a notebook.
No.
But other than that, it's just like it doesn't really. There's nothing stopping you but you from starting right now. Is essentially what I really want to say.
Yeah. So I have a question. What kind of advice would you give? I know me and you spoke about that thread of, Black creatives connecting to Black creatives and so on and so forth. How would you engage, or let's say, how would you tell somebody younger than you following your footsteps? How would you reach out to them? How would you help them? What advice would you give somebody who's starting out in this industry per se?
Well, figure out what your goal is, and then use the crew of people around you to accomplish that goal. Because when you start studying like how people came together and cliques and all that stuff, like, so my favorite, of course, is like I'm a huge fan of George Lucas and Francis Ford Coppola. And when they built Zoetrope, when it was basically their friends. Hey, you got a camera? We're in film school. You like this? You like that?
Yeah.
And they all just they connected, and they started making films with each other. They found more people like them, and I don't think any of them knew that they were going to be these titans that they became. But when they all knew each other, they were just trying to figure it out like anybody else, And even when you look at someone like Martin Scorsese and the relationship he has with his editor, Thelma Schoonmaker, like they met in school, Spike Lee and half the people that he works with were all friends. That he just kind of can't, like when you look at his relationship with Ernest Dickerson or Barry Alexander Brown or Sam Pollard or Wynn Thomas or Roby Reed or any of the people that I'm rolling off the top of my head that are now like household names, particularly if film production. They were just people trying to get a job, and they were all trying to get work together when they first started working out with each other. Half people I know from either as hip hop artists or people that are still like, writing about hip hop that have now made the transition into, film and television production, like whether it's like my friend, Mimi Valdez or Dream Hampton or, Sasha Jenkins or Selwyn Hines. I mean, we all know each other from magazines, it's like, the thing is that, or even when I first met Gary Gray was directing an Ice Cube video. And I met him when I interviewed Cube. Yeah. It's like everybody, I think the person that really kind of made it incredibly democratic for me was John Singleton. Well, my uncle, of course, my Uncle Richard is really my first and my greatest influence. But the thing about John was that when I met John, he was already, John Singleton, all caps, Oscar nominated, the whole nine. But he never acted like that. No, yes, absolutely. John absolutely had an ego. I mean, but he was funny with it. He wasn't like egotistical. He was just funny. I mean, he was like, I would always tease him because he always have his glasses, so you call him Mr. Mr. Magoo motherfucker. Like, he was, but he was a funny, he was a confident, funny guy that loves cinema, and he was a card carrying geek. And all we would do is we would go to movies and then go out to eat and then talk about the movie for another 4 or 5 hours. But because he was a filmmaker, he could also give you perspective on every aspect of the filmmaking and then tie it to some movies that you've never seen before. And that's what he taught me, was just the passion is important, and that the passion can come from anywhere and everywhere. And so you always have to be, open-minded and open to talking to people that you can sense the same passion in, because you never know who they're going to become, And so my perfect example for that is, John was a film student at USC when Dennis Hopper showed the movie Colors. And every single criticism that you had to me about the Jamaican accents, he had even worse to Dennis Hopper about, Colors and all the problems he had with Colors, and the fact that he was from South Central, and how he went at Dennis Hopper. And essentially what happened is after Dennis Hopper had the screening and that happened, he realized, I'm gonna do something about it. So he went home that night and he started writing the script that would become Boys in the Hood. And so what's important is that, whatever your passion is that you follow it up with action. Even if that action is small, you never know what that's going to accomplish in terms of your voice and in terms of putting you on that journey towards actually becoming a filmmaker. The other thing I also say is like, no matter how far you feel that you are from your dream, you have to follow if there's an internal voice telling you not to give up, then don't give up. I remember Franklin Leonard had a mixer with, as he often does, with writers and directors of various stages, just kind of getting together. And I was in the middle of editing season 1 of Luke Cage, and I was talking to a young filmmaker, and he had filmed the movie in the Bay Area that was kind of a cult classic, but didn't really take off too big. He was also staffed on a couple of TV shows, and had just come off a show, and it wasn't really a great experience, his time on that show. And he was working on this movie. And so, we're at one of these mixers and we're talking, and he's like, yeah, I've been filming this movie in Miami, in Florida, and I wrote the script, and I was lucky to get financing, and it's really come together. And he's talking about the movie, and I realized, I say, hey, wait a minute, yo, so you're the one directing the movie that my man Mahershala is flying from New York on Luke Cage, and he was basically making on weekends, right? And he was like, yeah, that's my movie. Turns out the brother I was talking to is the writer and director, Barry Jenkins, of Moonlight. And here it is, we're at this mixer and he doesn't even know if the movie's gonna work. And like, yeah, we're working on it, and I hope that we get financing, all that whole jazz. And then, I realized that, Mahershala is leaving the set of Luke Cage to make that film. And then I'm watching, 6 months later when he shocks the world, And so I always tell that story, and I always tell the story in that way, so that when people think about that it can't happen to them, or that they're that far from their dream, I just want everybody to know that, like, everybody has that moment of doubt, but everybody that stays in it and pushes forward, hopefully they can have the experience that Barry had with that movie, and that we all have, because, it's like, we're all just have to remind ourselves just to keep pushing forward.
Well, it's been so wonderful being able to pick your brain and talk to you. I know your wife is like wondering where you're doing right now, because we've had you on for like almost an hour and 30 minutes. But it's been wonderful talking to you and being able to pick your brain. I'm going to personally make it my mission for, Fox and the powers that be. They need to bring back Almost Human, because I loved that show, and then it disappeared from the airwaves, and I didn't get it back. So I'm gonna make it my personal mission now to get that restarted again. But it's been a joy having you here.
Such a joy. Yes.
Such a joy.
Thank you so much.
Before you go, can you give any of the fans out there what you're currently working on? What's your slate looking like right now? Before we go.
I always hate to talk about things before they're done. What I can talk about is right now I'm working on, because this has been announced. I never announced anything, but it got leaked, so fuck it. I'm adapting this book, 40 Acres, which I'm really excited about. It's a great book, and it has a very tricky premise. I'm either going to win an Oscar or a Razzie. If I pull it off, it's one or the other. There's no in between, It's been a very prolific year. I've worked on a couple of things feature wise. Like I worked on a Gucci Mane movie for Imagine Entertainment. That script kicked my ass, but I'm really proud of it. And then at the same time, I just finished a rewrite of another movie that I want to talk about, but I can't yet. And then at the same time, I've been trying to build various shows for my production company and my deal television wise with Amazon. And I'm also excited about a lot of that stuff too. I think the thing for me is I learned a long time ago, particularly working on Luke Cage, that like I don't really like to announce things until they're done, because the secrecy, part of it's paranoia, part of it's superstition, but part of it also is that like I find that when you make the announcement about something, unless it's ready to go, it takes something away from it. It takes something out of it. Like I'd rather just do like Beyonce does, and just like right around the time you're like wondering what's gonna happen, boom, a full album pops up, or be like Kendrick Lamar, because I know that Kendrick Lamar, there's gonna be no announcement. No. It's just like boom, it's the record's gonna pop up.
Yeah.
And I hope to do the same thing in terms of film and TV. But trust me, I'm working. I the legal pads are at the ready. I've got my pens. Like you guys can't really see my desk, but my desk itself is a whiteboard. So I'm constantly at work, and I'm just really excited. I pray for everybody's safety, because this COVID shit is no joke. So like I'm serious. Being in Seattle, where it began, and seeing where it is now, you never could have told me that it would continue, we would be where we are right now, But I think with this opportunity of stay safe, but also like this is also the opportunity to write. This is also the opportunity to communicate. This is also the opportunity to think about some of the things that you have plans for once this is all over. I mean, and from a filmmaking standpoint, this time does not have to be idle. I mean, safety first, always. But I mean, just in terms of being able to think about your next moves and think about things. I mean, you know, this is the possibilities that have opened up. I think are huge, and I think that it's important that everybody, you know, take advantage of this quiet. Is what I would say. Take advantage of the quiet. Now, I'm not saying take advantage of the tragedy and horror, because tragedy and horror are tragedy and horror, and should be regarded as such. And I'm really pissed at if we are going to get political for half a second. I'm pissed at how at the lack of leadership. You know, even though I didn't expect anything from him. You know, he who should not be named. You know, Agent Orange, as my man Spike calls him. You know, I'm just hoping that with the shift and the change, I'm just hoping that things change for the better, and that people take this seriously, because I've got a lot of friends who have family that have died from this, and you know, and are people continuing to get sick. And so I'm prayerful and hopeful that we get out of all this.
I think the three of us here in Atlanta have the same view on it, because people.
Oh, you're in Atlanta? Vote.
Yes, vote too.
If y'all haven't already cast your early ballots, I mean, tomorrow's the day.
Yeah.
Get out there.
Yeah.
Because the democracy is literally in the three of your hands. If they lose tomorrow and y'all didn't vote, I'm gonna host a podcast and bring y'all on, and that's cool about that.
I voted already. I early voted.
I voted.
I voted early. So
And I'll actually be working the elections tomorrow. So.
yes.
Okay.
Well, it's been nice talking to you, madam. Would you like closing us out real quick?
I would definitely close it out. I think that we all learned so much. We are so grateful for Cheo, and we are going to go ahead and press on with our pursuits with all of that advice in mind. And we hope that all the listeners who are listening and watching also gain something from this and continue to follow their dreams. And we hope you guys have a wonderful night or day or evening whenever you're listening to this. And we will speak to you next week.
All right, cool. Well, again, thank you for having me on. And my Twitter is Cheo, CHEO_Coker, COKER. So you know, my DMs are open, like or hit me, or if you diss me 3 times, I'm probably gonna show up anyway.
He will answer your DM to tell you to call in, people. All right, sayonara, guys.
All right.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.